Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Welcome to Living in the Solution with Dr. Elena George. Today we have a return guest, someone who I'm looking forward to speaking with. We're going to speak with Mr. James Gorrie. He's got a wealth of information, and he's, I think, a Renaissance man. He's an author. He's been a filmmaker. He's writes for the Epoch Times and speaks on a variety of topics such as the financial tech industry, cybersecurity, and he has a website called The Banana Republican where he covers a wide range of topics, including current events, China, the economy, and everything pertaining to it, and other things that enrich our lives, such as science, technology, religion, and culture. And today we're going to have a conversation about the American dream. You know, when I was a kid, it was always about the white picket fence. It was about being independent, putting away savings, and so that your children could live better than you did. I think that was the underlying foundation of the American dream. And you wrote an article for the Epoch Times entitled How Wall Street is Killing the American Dream. And I wanted to discuss that because as we spoke about before we started the show, I think people, whether they're homeowners, whether they're renting, they know something's wrong, but I'm not sure they can get their brain around what's happening. So I wanted to thank you so much for coming back on today.
Absolutely, Dr. George. My pleasure. And I think you are right. There is a sense that the American dream and the whole idea and the foundation of the America that you and I grew up with is somehow not reachable, out of reach. Maybe it was never even there, or if it was there, it was not legitimate. Let's say that. So, yeah, I felt this article was very important to get out there because of you and I both know that the American dream is not what it was, but it certainly can be again.
Well, I think that's very hopeful. So my first question is, what made you come up with this article? It's very unique and it's very specific. Is there something about the economy, about what's going on in our society that triggered this for you?
Absolutely. I've looked at real estate for at least 10 or 15 years. I've owned several properties in the past, and I'm about to own and pick up another one. But the thing I was looking at was how a lot of these properties on the single family, the single family ownership skyrocketed in 2005s and 6s and 7s, and then it went the other direction due to the fact of the great financial crisis and those types of things. In the aftermath of that, we saw some homes being sold, by tranches, not one or twos, but by dozens or so, and being picked up. That was to be expected, I suppose, because so many were just vacant, and whole neighborhoods were vacant at the time. But now it's become it hasn't gone away, and I'm noticing much more cash buying and much more rents are just skyrocketing. Mm-hmm. So there has to be something up, and it's Wall Street institutional buyers that are picking up houses, especially in the last 6, 7, 8 years.
And when I think about what you said, it reminds me of the healthcare industry, specifically the independent practices. That same Wall Street, I don't know what you want to call it, this movement is happening in the healthcare sector, where private practices were being bought out and managed by Wall Street firms. I think it happened to the veterinarian section. All these other independent, wealth-creating entities, including being a homeowner. Isn't that one of the most important ways, the easiest ways that people found to create wealth in our society?
It is, and it's a way to create transgenerational wealth. You inherit your home from your parents and grandparents, and so it's a great way to transfer wealth from one generation to the next. And to hit on your prior point, there is a tremendous elevation or transference is a better word of wealth from the middle class going up to the upper class, to the Wall Street class, and that's by design. And there's a very simple way of seeing how that happens. Banks, the big banks, are coordinated with the Fed, and then the banks below them are coordinated with them as well. And, they get infusions of cash. They get large infusions of cash to supposedly go into the economy at very low interest rates. And they have to go somewhere. Sometimes it's the stock market. Sometimes it's the healthcare industry. In other words, anytime you have large amounts of capital flowing from the Federal Reserve or the government into large businesses, corporations, banks, and so forth, there's a complete imbalance of power and buying capability and market distortions. And it doesn't really matter where it comes from. Back in the 80s, Japanese buyers were distorting the market in California, and then when their economy tanked, it rebounded. It had repercussions, and it crashed. But with federal governments not having to make a profit, as it were, but able to certainly direct policy and to get things done on their agenda, that's what's happening. You're seeing a transfer of wealth-generating asset classes, and industries being taken out of the middle class up to the 1%, and that's by cheap money, lots of it, and very little legal protections in place to protect the middle class.
So if I'm reading what you said correctly, I remember when I was a kid in New York, it was Japan, and I think then it was the Middle Eastern money flowing in. I think China came in, and basically that's the last huge foreign investment class. Now this is different, you're saying, right? Because it's not about the market anymore. It's about the government partnering with corporate America or Wall Street and picking winners and losers. That's an ongoing thing. No one's going to want to jump out of that because the money is free flowing and it never stops if you print it up, right?
Exactly. There's trillions and trillions of dollars in debt that somehow get rolled over. In the meantime, more money's flowing to these large banks, these large corporate interests. And they're buying up land. They're buying up businesses. They're buying up mortgages. They're buying up. So the government's becoming and the Federal Reserve and the banking system is becoming kind of an owner of, rather an owner of last resort. Now it's an owner of first resort. In other words, I think in my article, I talk about a MetLife prediction or projection that corporate ownership of houses, single-family residence, will be at 40% by 2030, where it was basically zero 20 years ago, or close enough. So why would that be happening? Well, as you point out, it's happening in other sectors and industries. So why wouldn't it happen in real estate? And the problem is when these institutional buyers, they may buy entire divisions from the home builders and then set the rent, set the prices. So they buy it before they're built or just as they're built. They buy a lot of them, all of them, most of them, whatever they can. And now if you own it, you set the purchase price, you set the rental price. So it's no longer a market, it's a monopoly, if you will, of certain areas and certain types of housing. Certainly there are corporate apartment buildings and apartment companies, of course, as well. They tend to set market rates, but if they're all working at the same level, then there's a bit of price setting that goes on, if you will, because it's not market driven, it's owner driven.
Again, I'm seeing a correlation like with this and the healthcare space, with the big pharma and the pharmacies joining together, in these silos where you have preferred pharmacies and they get to set the price, they get to set what the formulary is. And that usually means, and I'm going to extrapolate from the healthcare to everything else, that means less choice for the individual. That means more money that you're going to have to put out, and you're going to lose power. Like you lose control over your individual pocketbook. I mean, if you're the only game in town, right? You're forced to enter that system whether you like it or not. And that really troubles me.
But yes, particularly if they eliminate the competition, and not just in kind, but in the marketplace. So, for example, we'll look at this ridiculous and utterly overreach of the pharmaceutical industry with regard to the vaccines for the COVID. I don't know where you stand on that one way or the other, but it certainly ought to bother everybody that a handful of companies, literally a handful of companies, are not only chosen to provide this vaccine, but are given protection from any kind of blowback in terms of harmful results from that and outcomes and so forth, and became mandated for a lot of government agencies and educational institutions, schools, high schools, colleges, and so forth, and workplaces. So it mandated those things. But on the flip side, it took away the alternative. They outlawed or just invalidated, delegitimized other alternatives that may have been successful or were successful. So there's way too much power. We're seeing a lot of power and money and control and lack of choice and alternatives being put together at the government and corporate level. And that's called fascism.
Exactly. You took the word out of my mouth. It's this cycle of money changing hands between two groups that benefit each other. So if people look at the money going into the lobbyists, one of the top 10 is healthcare space. I don't know where real estate fits in that, or I should say Wall Street, but I'm sure it's pretty high. So if they're giving money to various campaigns, they're going to get the legislation that they want. They're not going to get pushback. And whoever, they're supposed to be working for the people, everybody in governmental position, whether that's local or federal. But it seems to me that we're the outlier. They could care less about working for the interest of their constituents at this point. It's like a whole section. It's all about getting in again and again and follow the money.
Yeah, it becomes a closed circle. And, that also attaches to pharmaceutical executives and the FDA. So you have executives or FDA executives in offices, officials, then take jobs in the pharmaceutical industries, in the firms that they were regulating or approving, as it were, pharmaceutical remedies and formulas and vaccines. And now, after 5 years there, they step into a multi-million-dollar executive role with Pfizer or with Moderna or whomever. And so there's that cloistered kind of inbreeding of officers and officials and executives. So there's no honesty, there's no openness, there's no competitiveness. It's a closed group, and neither you nor I are in it, by the way.
No. But what makes it interesting...
we're buying units, right?
Basically, we're just, you're right. But what makes it interesting, too, is that they want to call this democracy, and they want to poo-poo capitalism. But this is not capitalism, what you just described, where you can hang up your shingle, you can open up your store, and you can freely compete with your neighbor or the person down the block. That's not happening anymore. So that I don't believe you can call this capitalism, can you?
No, not in the sense that it's supposed to be. Because remember, capitalism is supposed to be coupled with liberty and freedom and choice. The whole idea of capitalism is to provide market choice, at least as it was envisioned in the U.S. So, from a choice and competition and reward are all great things for a society. It breeds excellence. It incentivizes people to do things differently. The problem is when you have too much power in too few hands, and that power is married, joined at the hip, if you will, between corporatism, financialism, and government. Then that's that iron triangle that other countries had, like Japan, and has had it for decades, and China as well, where there is no top to bottom down filter or transition of capital. Are decisions made at the top, and then they're handed down. And when that happens, we don't have a democracy. We don't want to live in a democracy. We live in a republic. Mm-hmm. But when our representatives are subject to bribery or to high influence and to rewards once they leave their government post, then they're apt to behave in ways that will get them that executive post once they leave their government role. So, the system isn't operating the way it was designed to operate. And, that isn't new. I mean, Eisenhower in his farewell address back in 1961, I believe, warned about the military-industrial complex, describing the same type of thing.
On that note, let's take our first break and just digest that, because what you've just said is a mouthful and it's truth. And people need to understand that there is no level playing field. There are two tiers, and some people can play the game and others can't. So let's take our first break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living the Solution. We're speaking with Mr. James Gorrie, and he's the author of The China Crisis. He's also writes for Zero Hedge, or has written for Zero Hedge and RealClear Politics. And before the break, you did a wonderful job of giving a foundation for this system. I've said it many times on the podcast that this is not a game that we can play and hope to win at. So the only way to win is not to play the game at all, because you just described a whole infrastructure. Who has enough money to play this game except these people that we just described? So from the standpoint of this template that's been used, do you think that the housing market is one of the last pieces of this machine that's coming online? We've done healthcare, we've done politics, we've done education. I think that's pretty much gone. And so now we're dealing with what, the real essence, our home, the thing that makes us a family, gives us a foundation. They're trying to steal that from people. Is this another piece of this game, this board? A piece on this game that they're playing?
It sure looks like it. And I think on the upside, or at least there was reason for optimism, in that people are aware of it. And there is some legislation that's coming out in Texas and different places. Nothing's been passed yet. I think in a large measure, and there's some irony here, it takes a billionaire real estate developer to catch, to fight this kind of thing. I think that's where Donald Trump kind of brings in, inside baseball knowledge about how Wall Street works, how the real estate industry works, and by the way, we're seeing the corporate real estate having some very big problems with the 3-year notes that are now maturing, that were last issued when the interest rates were at 2%, and now they're at 7-8%. And so a lot of those corporate office buildings that Wall Street has obviously been, landlords and investors in, and so forth, those are problematic. Now there may be some remedies, such as extending the term of the existing notes and so forth, but by and large, and I'm not the only one to say this, folks like Elon Musk and other Wall Street people said it too, is that they're looking at a collapse, or at least an adjustment, and I mean that in the stark terms of valuations. We're already seeing that, and I don't think there can be enough loans extended to prevent that. People just aren't going to the office buildings in downtown areas, in the urban areas, the way they were pre-COVID. And the way our urban centers are being disturbed and destroyed by unsafe conditions and homelessness and rioting and those kinds of things, I don't think the values are going to return across the board quick enough, soon enough, or high enough to save corporate real estate. And so my point there is that commercial real estate is often a precursor or a trigger to set the real estate, the residential real estate market to follow suit. We may see a real adjustment downward there as well. But it is the last bastion of homeownership. Is the last bastion. If you have a nation of renters, you can control them. If you have a nation of homeowners, it's much harder to control, because they have their home and they have assets, they have equity, and they can have, if they need to earn living, they can rent rooms out and so forth, which we're seeing that a lot of, and so forth. So you're right. Attacking the home is kind of one of the biggest and last straws that they want to lay on the camel's back here.
So from a standpoint of the individual, it's hard to say this, but are we in a position where we can be overwhelmed by this tidal wave because of debt? Because people, I mean, the COVID was a major, major player in this, wasn't it? Where you had people who were stable, who owned their own, whether they hung out their shingle and had their own business, which went under during COVID, where we had those were too big to fail, or, essential, and those were deemed unessential. Did that trigger this? Was that the first log that was pulled away that allowed people to be a little bit more resilient? Did they lose their resilience because they lost their ability to make money, to own their own business, for example?
Certainly some people did, although I don't think we're going to see that kind of reaction again, whether or not we have another quote unquote pandemic or other types of medical emergency. People won't comply to a large extent. And the other thing it's done is it has served as kind of a fire, putting a fire in the belly of people to readjust. People are flexible. People are resilient, and online businesses and people buying houses with 2 or 3 people on the deed as opposed to 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4. There's a lot of ways to combat this. Veteran VA loans, veteran administration loans are assumable, and those that were issued during the lower rates, they are assumable by new buyers. So, when people move with a VA loan, their buyers can assume it. So it's a nice way of getting into a house with nothing down on an assumable loan, but presumably you have the credit to do so. So there's a lot of options that people can do. That it takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of creativity, but people have tremendous amounts of effort and creativity. So I think the writing's on the wall that Wall Street and the banks would certainly love to own the property market and push everyone into the rental column, and that's happening to some degree, but I also think there'll be some pushback. Now, COVID was, I think, a big test. They sound so, I don't know what's the word, conspiratorial, but it was certainly a test of our rights as individuals, our rights as Americans. I mean, we weren't, all of a sudden the CDC says if you're a landlord, you can no longer collect rent from your tenants. Well, I don't remember electing the CDC. In fact, I don't think it's even a member of the that's not a government agency, as I recall. It's a private agency. But so we saw a lot of abuse under the cover, under the guise of safety. But keeping people safe means stay in your house, shut up, wear a mask, and don't have an opinion. And that's wearing thin on the American public, I think.
I hope so.
To a certain extent.
I certainly hope so. And it reminds me, too, of the student loan aspect of this, right? People didn't have to pay, just like they didn't have to pay their rent, didn't have to pay their student loan debt. And now there's this tsunami of, now that it's activated again, how much you owe or how much more in debt are you. It just had so many long-term effects for such a short and small. I don't think there was a gain, honestly, but for what the proposed gain was, it certainly didn't outweigh what people are dealing with now.
No, it didn't, and it did serve a purpose, whether they intended it or not. Is it kind of let the American people see who is behind the American idea and who would like to see all the rules changed. And that woke crowd, the whole idea of not paying things back and getting these enormously expensive university degrees with no tangible application in real life. That has soured a lot of people on college, and rightly so. I know of plumbers making $100,000 a year. I know of teachers making $45,000 a year, right?
Yeah,
I mean, so you think about it in terms of entrepreneurs, right? People now are getting together and saying, look, let's start a business. We all got part-time jobs because we're underemployed. But so it cuts both ways. It can depress people. Oh, I got this degree and I have all this debt and I wasted my time and my money and my youth, etc. There's that part. But the other part is people aren't seeing the value of going to college anymore. And I don't think everyone needs to have a college degree. I know Bill Gates doesn't have a college degree, and I think he did okay. Steven Spielberg doesn't have a college degree. He already got one a few years back, but I think the point is that if you're talented and you work hard and you work smart and you get out there, you can make things happen. And it doesn't have to be on the Spielberg or the Bill Gates level. It can be on the installation of Windows level, or it can be on the, things that the baseline economy needs to have done. People need to have done, the service industries. It's steady work.
Absolutely is. Or if you know how to fix appliances or things, skill level that people never learned, you're going to be very valuable with supply chain issues and everything else.
Supply chain issues, house cleaning. I've got a couple who started a maid service for house cleaning, and now they're multi-million. They own a couple of multi-million-dollar properties, and so I know them just from a tangential acquaintance. I'm not great friends with them, but I did speak to them a couple times. And they said, "Look, yeah, we started small, and we delivered a great service at a great price."
Wow, what a concept!
And that's where it starts. What a concept, right, Dr. George?
Yeah.
Deliver quality at a repeatable price. You're gonna have a lot of people knocking on your door.
I think maybe it's going to force people, jog them out of this complacency of there's one path, and they've created this, I don't know, propaganda maybe about one path. You need to go through high school. You need to go to college. You need to take on massive amounts of debt. You need to have advanced degrees in order to be successful. When in actuality, that's actually put you on the path that we're seeing people get damaged by because they have all this stuff. But they're
they're trying to create a declaration of dependence, as it were, a generational dependence, right? You're not smart enough to get into school, so we're going to lower the standards. Or you need to get a college degree, and if you don't get a college degree, or you do and you don't get a job, then it's due to some other external force beyond your control. So this goes into all kinds of relationships between people. But I have found in life, and I'm sure you have too, is that if somebody does a really good job, and you need that skill or you need that service, you're going to hire them.
Exactly. Doesn't matter what they look like.
It doesn't matter what they look. You're going to hire them.
Exactly.
If you're good at sales, you're good at sales. And if you're good at setting bones, you're going to be a great orthopedic surgeon, whatever it might be, right? I mean, that's just, and if you're not, then you ought not to be in that field.
It's very simple.
What's that?
It's a very simple concept, isn't it?
I know. And that's what our founding fathers figured out really, really quickly. They figured out, look, because, when they first came here, it was communism. It was everybody works their ability and contributes. Well, they starved. People forget about that. But Jamestown was originally a commune, and people who, he had to come out and say, the leader of I can't remember his name, but he said, look, you don't work, you don't eat. And by the time 100 years later, bustling economy. People were, you could start a business anywhere. You could, whatever it was, and you had opportunity because there was more people, more demand. As far as I can tell, the population in the U.S. is still rising. It's moving around a little bit. It's going where the demand is, right? It's going where the market is free. It's going where there's opportunity. And I thankfully, they haven't proposed any kind of laws that prevent people from moving through the country freely to where those opportunities are. But that's what's going to happen. You're going to see two different states of America. We are probably have it a little bit here, obviously, but I think when it comes to real estate, you're going to go to housing, go buy where you can buy a house. You're going to leave California and you're going to go somewhere else to buy a house and get a job and earn a living and provide for your family.
That's what should happen.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to backtrack to what you said about people who have the VA loans. Am I reading it correctly that you don't, if they sell the property, I don't know, you can't, if you're not a veteran, you can't access a VA loan, can you?
I think you can, yes.
Wow.
You can assume, VA loans are assumable.
Well, that's pretty amazing.
Read, if they've changed the law recently, that may be the case. But as far as I know, they are assumable.
That's pretty incredible because their rates are completely, it's a different scale than the commercial side of this.
And they're 100% loan to value too, right? So
wow.
Veterans can get in with no money down and someone else can assume the loan.
That's impressive.
So I used to be in real estate as a mortgage broker years and years ago. And that was one of the selling point, a couple of selling points. You get in, you get, easier to qualify, obviously, no money down, and people can assume them. I think that's still the case.
Wow. Just imagine that. I mean, you feel like you're right. You're priced out at this point because the money down, the interest rates are, but I don't even know what they are now, 8, maybe 9%, who knows? But it's priced out. Young people with first houses, the seniors are getting pretty much nailed as well. So it's a free for all.
Yeah, people aren't selling because if you have a house mortgage that's $600,000 at 2%, then your monthly nut is probably somewhere around $3,000, I suppose. But if you want to sell that house and pick up another property and put $400,000 down, have a $600,000 note, well, then your monthly nut's going to be $6,000-7,000 a month, $8,000 a month. So whatever it might be. Yeah, I've been doing the math quick and dirty in my head, but I think interest rates between around 7-ish, and depending on the term and the adjustments and so fixed and so forth, different factors there. But I look at what remember all the boat people, the Vietnamese folks and the Cambodians came over in the 80s.
Yeah, the Hmong. Yeah,
and Well, in Westminster, California, a lot of them in Garden Grove, they just, as soon as they could, they banded their monies together and bought a house. They lived together in an apartment, 5, 10 of them, whatever it was. And then they bought a house, and they all lived in the house. And then when they could, they bought another house, and they literally coordinated, they pooled their efforts of, you had 5, 8 working adults. And that's what they did, because they could see that once you're on the ladder, it's like the biblical thing. To those who have, more will be given. To those who don't, even what they have will be taken. And what that means, I think, is you do one smart decision, and then you're in a position to take another smart step, and then another smart step. But when you when you make poor decisions, even what you have, you'll lose. So there's always opportunity. It's being able to see it. And I think in the case of, just to bring it full circle to the corporate ownership of houses, I think they'd like to have a nation of renters, because it takes away that kind of power. It breeds dependency, despair, and when you're dependent and despairing, you're easily controlled.
I absolutely agree with you. That fear and anxiety is paralyzing, and it makes you more liable or more easily of the mindset that someone has to take care of me. And that's exactly what I think the system is designed to have happen. I mean, it just reminds me of the WEF, and you'll own nothing and like it. I mean, this is pretty much what they've decided how they want the system to run. And is this an example of it?
Yeah, and interesting you brought that up. You know what's fascinating about that, and I don't want to be underplay it's the horror of the prospect of that, but what I find fascinating is that somehow this guy Klaus and his entourage of monstrous human beings, they feel comfortable announcing it as if it's a done deal. And that is something that is, I haven't heard anybody say really, oh gosh. My question is, where does that confidence come from? They're either going to look like idiots to the whole world, or they know something we don't. I hate to put it in those two terms, but you catch my drift, right?
I do.
Obviously, why would you go public and say, I'm going to do this, or you're going to own nothing and you'll love it? And then I watched some videos of these guys talking, and there's our President Joe Biden in the audience. So maybe he's not talking through his hat. Who knows?
I think what we're saying underneath everything is that we as individuals have the power. We can choose. We have a choice here. You can choose to opt out of this system of despair, find alternative pathways, which you just admirably described. And that's not the only place that we can do it. You make your decisions, and you're right. You make good decisions after good decisions that keep you out of this debt trap and in the clutches of the system, where once you're in, they don't want you out. And they want your mind to be overtaken by, why, well, I'm just one person, what can I do? Then they've won when you start to think like that. And I know, we haven't talked about the the divide and conquer strategy of everybody being a victim and everybody is out to get everybody else. That's another example of this to me, where you have people hating on each other so much they cannot see the bigger picture because they're too busy in the mud. Is that something that you think also with this DEI and all these other corporate games that they play, that they're trying to really just parse people and actually make us our lowest common denominator?
Sure. It's with the DEI, what is it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's also with ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And I wrote a piece on this a while back as well. Oh, how ESG is changing, stakeholder capitalism versus just stockholder capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of a play on words. And if you're a public company, your fiduciary obligation is to your stockholders. But if you're a public company, according to the ESG doctrine, then the stakeholders are the rest of the world, because they have a stake in how you run your company, who can buy what you produce, who's on your board, because what you do affects everybody else. And so now so stakeholder capitalism is another word for fascism. It's just they take a word like capitalism and they attach another modifier to it, and you think it sounds pretty close, but it's completely different. They never call things as they are.
No, it's a manipulation.
It's the abuse of language, right?
Exactly. And it sounds all great, but it's the opposite of what it really said. What they're saying and what it means are two different things.
Exactly. Now, diversity and equity and inclusion, and the wokeness that comes with it. Now, it wasn't me who pointed it out, but I'm sure we've all felt it. When I said to my wife, we were watching a show, and a 115-pound girl takes, actress, woman, hits a guy in the jaw, a 220-pound guy in the jaw, and knocks him down. And the story loses all credibility when that happens. It's supposed to empower women, but it's also it's just telling someone a lie does not empower them, right? You're lying to them. And these woke Marvel characters, this last movie that Disney's been a disaster, is kind of proof of that. The movie industry is ESG and DEI and woke and every other acronym that stands for, that seeks to delegitimize traditional norms and values that which the country was founded on, by the way. I mean, America is one of the few countries that's founded on a set of ideals put out in a document.
What's interesting is that people aren't buying it, right? They're not going to these movies. They're not buying the products. They're not going to these stores. So it's not like it's that they hope that it's pervading society, but society's rejecting it. But then when you think about where the money comes from, they can afford to do this till the cows come home because they don't depend on us buying their product. They just want to basically mind control us or manipulate reality to gain what they want to gain.
That's true. They're not depending on the American market. Hollywood's run by China. It's funded by China, either through Chinese investment in the actual production or in the China market where the movies are shown. And so because China has such influence over the film market, the film industry, especially in Hollywood per se, Hollywood is subject to China censors. Mm-hmm. And that's been going on an awful long time. Think back to the movie 2012. Who saves the world with the arcs? It's China. Mm-hmm. Saves the world with the arcs, right? In 2012, China could barely build a dam that wouldn't burst after 5 years. So the fact is that China, that movie was specifically created to do well in China, and China became the hero. And the Americans looked awfully bad, actually, the film. So it gets back to the Soviet era and the Nazi era propaganda culture, because look, people know that culture drives politics. Politics is downstream from culture, and people get their ideas kids, particularly young adults, get their ideas and their identities from stories, from the movies, from video, from anime, from whatever form it might take. That's where their kind of collective and even individual values are truly found many times, not all the time, but a lot of times, especially if they don't have anything competing with it.
So when you think about this, it's starting to become clear about the younger generation. They're disconnected, honestly, from reality, from anything that's pro-America, pro-country. So if they've been propagandized by these movies and video games, etc., it's not a big jump to understand why they are so anti what should be capitalism, American values, family values, etc. It's really designed to take them out of that paradigm, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And what's more family oriented than your own house?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
What's more, my dad used to tell lost my folks a few years back, but they grew up during the Depression. And my dad, we're past Pasadena, California, and they weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination. However, they did have, the Depression, a lot of folks didn't do well. A lot of families didn't do well. Fathers split, wives divorced, things like that. And my dad said to me he had a bunch of friends of every race you can think of, and a couple you probably can't. These were guys who were digging ditches at 14 and, hauling ice before the refrigerators and during just doing really tough jobs, going to high school, playing on football teams and doing all these rough things. And a lot of these guys didn't have intact homes. My dad said, yeah, it's Tom over there had to disarm his dad from attacking him with an axe at 14, Joe over there, his dad never came back from, a sales trip over. So a lot of these kids my dad grew up with, they ended up in my grandparents' house. And they would tell me 40 years after the fact, yeah, your grandparents kept a roof over my head when I needed and kept my stomach full. And that would not be possible if you didn't have a house,
Yeah.
And so you want the strength of America, the strength of a society is in the common person's ability. I mean average person. Yeah, I can get a house. I can put a roof over my head. There's dignity in the work I do. And I get paid an honest day's work. And, I sound like a Clarence, I sound like a socialist, but I'm not. But I understand that there's value in property. There's value in pride and ownership and in taking care of your family and having a family and being able to do those things. So destroying that family unit, destroying your ability to afford a house and destroying your ability to earn a living, well, then you're dependent on someone else. You're dependent on the government.
You're depending on the kindness of the government, that they actually want to see you succeed, and that these corporate shills, that they want you to be successful by their product. Let's take our last break because I'm curious to know I know they stand to gain power, but what's the point if you don't have people to buy your product, to actually be consumers? So on that note, let's take our last break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living in Solution. We're speaking with Mr. James Gorrie, and you can go to his website, The Banana Republican. It's thebananarepublican.com, correct?
Correct.
And they can buy your books, The China Crisis. Is it on that site, or can they find it on Amazon?
It's on Amazon. It may be out of print. I need to write another book. But.
Okay. You're living your life, so I understand. But there's a lot going on, so you're gonna be writing for a while. From the point of the last segment is, I understand power. I understand that people want at all costs to have it, but you're a corporate industry. You have to have people buy your product. What's the point of this? If the people are just subsisting, they can't afford to buy anything. And if they want to bring in social credit score, etc., what's the point? What do you gain from this when there's nothing past subjugation to keep you going?
That's a great question. Why would you? Well, it's approach it from the opposite direction, I suppose. If you look at policies such as 9-month abortions or first 30 days after birth abortions, or gender reassignment surgery, where you essentially sterilize young boys and girls. And you listen to the rhetoric of the climate folks like John Kerry and the wonderful people at the World Economic Forum and King Charles, among others. Apparently, population is a big problem. So, on the one hand, your question is completely valid. Why would you eliminate the market to keep you in business for crying out loud? But on the other hand, it seems that population is a big problem to them. So, which question is the more on target? What's the big problem with population? China has had that one-child policy for decades, and they're on the verge of collapse in terms of being able to support themselves.
Yeah.
So I don't know where what the end game is. You can certainly pencil it out in a couple of different directions. Depopulation of the planet to some degree, or to a large degree. I don't know. I've heard different wish lists on that from some different people. But it may be they're trying to bring about the end of capitalism. If the end of capitalism, then, as we're seeing now, the corporate, a lot of the Wall Street, they're living off government issued money to a large extent, or to some extent. So to be honest with you, I don't understand myself why they would want to eliminate so many potential kind of customers, I guess, for lack of a better word, in terms of being able to afford things. Power being what it is, I suppose, if you go back to the Soviet Union, they had no middle class, really. And for 70 years, the guys in power, the folks in power, had a lot of great lives, for the most part. And in China is a social credit system, and their middle class is shrinking, and more power is flowing up to the party rapidly. So that seems to be the trend. It didn't end well for the Soviet Union. It won't end well for China. It may not end well for us if we don't change our trajectory. But as to why, well, I think power likes to be exclusive and so forth. And maybe it's just that they don't give a damn about anybody else. And it's not about money as much as about living well at the expense of the rest. And that's the top 1/10 of 1% or whatever it is, right? I think you have 90 million party members in China out of a country of 1.3 or 4 billion people. So nobody really cares about that, about the bottom 99.99%, I'm afraid.
Well, not until they get excited about taking their power back, then I think they'll care at that point. From the standpoint of, they're talking about serfdom, right? Neo-serfdom, or going back to that system where it's the serfs and everybody else above them.
Global feudalism.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a flip side to that, or another dimension, and that is, the rise of AI has been talked about by none other than Yuval Harari. I guess he's the number 2 guy up at the World Economic Forum. You can construe that as you will. He talked about, well, what are we going to do with these, billions of useless human beings we don't need, because AI has taken over their jobs. Mm-hmm. And he said that within the last year or two, I don't think it went down well, so he hasn't brought it up lately that I can tell. But I think the cat's out of the bag. Certainly, as a writer, AI can write. That takes away lawyers, that takes away writers, that takes away designers, that takes, AI is capable of doing a lot of things, especially, the curve is, once the curve gets steep enough, it really goes. And I'm not an AI expert, but I have talked to several people who know about it. So we may see a lot of people, factory workers and manufacturing and a lot of type of kind of the intellectual side of things, lawyers, doctors, operations, and so forth, that may be just rendered to an algorithm at some point.
I mean, was that part of what the Hollywood strike was about? They didn't want to be replaced by AI. The writers, the actors, kind of interesting. Since they proponents of this system, they could be the biggest victims of it and just put out, non sequitur at this point. I mean, AI sounds good in theory, but it's uncontrollable. I mean, it's something that is self-perpetuating, and at some point it may find that humans are unnecessary, no matter if you're in the high 1% or not.
Right. That was Elon Musk's point. I mean, he's a paradox, because on the one hand, he and others, he's not the only one, is born, look, we're releasing the demon with AI because we won't be able to control it. And on the other hand, his response to that is to have a company called Neuralink, which will link you up to the internet, which will dehumanize you, in other words, right? Trying to make you compete with AI by becoming an AI, which to me is that's not a viable option for me. Okay.
Understood completely.
Looking for volunteers, I understand. So if you have nothing going on, you might want to check them out. But for me, I would rather pick weeds, I think, in the backwaters of some southern state than I think have some injectable neurological link to the internet. I just don't think that's a good idea.
I'm right along with you on that one.
I just don't see that. I don't see that as helping humanity or even preserving my humanity. I don't want to keep up with AI, right?
No.
So it's a strange set of things we're seeing, and a lot of different trends, and most of them that are top down aren't good.
No, they try to make it sound like it's good and to, gloss it over with advancement, but it's always at the expense of humanity and empathy and individuality. And for me, those are the hallmarks of what it means to be human. So, and to have some sort of passion about living. How do you live in a society where you're basically just a drone or hooked into it? I mean, it sounds like the Matrix, basically.
It kind of does. And, this is more of a philosophical, perhaps even ecclesiastical question. But, look, human beings are the biggest problem with human beings is that you get so much power. They say money changes people. It doesn't. It reveals them. Well, I think you could say power doesn't change people. It reveals them. And the human heart is capable of all kinds of things, depending on what the situation is, right? I mean, you get pacifist people, and then if they have to defend their kids, Vera comes out and look out, because she will stop at nothing. And so there's, people, and some people are sadistic. Some people, don't care about humanity. Joe Stalin said right now, he said, well, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. So you have to harden your heart, or maybe perhaps it's already hardened. Maybe you're dehumanized in some way. But I think, we looked at, when I was in college, Hitler was an aberration. We couldn't explain it from a international relations point of view. Okay, it was an aberration. He didn't fit the mold. Well, within the next 30 years of his death, there was Mao Zedong, and then there was Pol Pot, and then there was the kind of Kiva, and so there's a bunch of little Hitlers running around slaughtering people en masse. And so we have to ask, well, it certainly looks like Hitler isn't the aberration anymore.
No.
Isn't that a frightening thought?
I'm optimistic because I think there are more awesome, excellent, empathetic people who outweigh this. They just want to suppress the voice. That's why they're trying to suppress the internet and everything else, because people, I think on the whole, are really good. And this is an superimposition of this negative, evil system on people. We just need to wake up, find each other, withdraw our consent from this situation, and get rid of it, throw it off.
Sure. I mean, look, think about Klaus Schwab and Albert Bourla from Pfizer, and say the Bill Gateses, and these guys, there's only a very thin layer. They just happen to be at the top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They just happen to be in charge of policy. Most people aren't going to be doing those types of things. The vast majority. But that type of person, whether they have some kind of malfunctioning moral compass or attached to some other kind of influence, spiritual influence perhaps. But if they're doing those types of things and they have power, that's why they're doing it. That's what allows them to do it. So there's a heck of a lot more good people, decent people than there are indecent people. But I will say it seems to be there's a lot more indecency running around these days.
I would
more
agree
manifestations of it.
I would agree with that, but I think there's an end point to it. We have to bring it to an end, and unfortunately, we're at the end of the show. So I want to make sure that people know how to read your articles and how they can find your book if it's still out there.
Sure, they can read my articles at the Epoch Times. I have usually an article or two a week, and it fluctuates. So you can go to the bananarepublican.com, and my book is available on Amazon. Let's see, I'm speaking next week or the week after at Lincoln Club in Orange County. I have some other potential speaking dates, but I don't know what they are at the moment. But so that's they can get a hold of me. I'm on Twitter, and you can get a hold of me there. And happy to chat, happy to hear your thoughts, and rally for the good cause.
Always. Mr. Gorrie, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our conversation. You're just a blessing.
My many thanks to you, Dr. George. It's always a pleasure. Look forward to next time.
Me too.
Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too. And thank you, everybody, for living in the solution.
Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Liberty Talk FM.